Welcome to Wednesdays with Willa. I am your host, Willa White, and this is my weekly podcast show that airs on Wednesday mornings at 10 a.m. on my Facebook page, Willa White Medium. So you can tune in there live at 10 a.m. on Wednesdays and also look at the archive videos of past shows. I have some great guests that I have each week, and we cover a different spiritual topic relating to spiritualism, mediumship, healing, faith, family, and more. And I'm delighted to have as my special guest today, Andy Byng. Thanks for being here today, Andy.
It's an absolute pleasure, and thank you for inviting me onto your show.
Yes, we have a great topic ahead of us, powerful spirit communication. And I know a lot of people are very excited about this particular topic, whether they are developing as mediums, professional mediums, or maybe they're just starting out in terms of understanding about mediumship, or they've maybe only had a mediumship reading. And so I think we're going to be able to cover the gamut for them and explain a little bit about those powerful aspects of spiritual communication. Those of you who are joining me for the first time, this is Wednesdays with Willa, and this is my weekly podcast show. You can also tune in on blogtalkradio.com/Lilydale Radio, and that's an audio only version. So you can enjoy it there if that's the better platform for you. This also gets uploaded later to my YouTube channel, Willa White. So a lot of great places for you to tune in to this particular show. Now, I want to talk about a little background with you, Andy. I know that you've been a spiritual medium for many years now in a professional capacity. How many years would you say you've been a medium?
I started my development in 2004. So it's been 17 years, I guess.
Yes, time flies, right? It sure does. And it's wonderful that you have had that steady progression within your own mediumship. And I think people probably notice your accent. If most of my viewers that come from the US probably notice that Andy has an accent. You're originally from the United Kingdom, and you're currently living in Toronto, Canada, correct?
Yeah, I moved into Toronto Christmas Eve, actually, of 2019. It was a nice Christmas present. I got married in November, and my wife is Canadian, so we decided to move to Toronto. It's been great.
Lovely. I love it. I think it's great that you have been able to kind of become transcontinental, as it were. But you are also a tutor at Arthur Findlay College, and you enjoy teaching for them as well. And Arthur Findlay College, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, is in the United Kingdom, and some people refer to it for the Hogwarts for mediumship. That's what some people affectionately term it. But it's an opportunity for people to go and gather and learn about mediumship and their skills as mediums. And so you, Andy, have taught there for how many years now?
Several years. I can't actually remember when I became an approved tutor at the college. I think it was probably 2014, 2013, around that time.
Great. So one of the things that I have to say, I had the joy of watching Andy do his mediumship here in Lilydale one time, and it was just really glorious to see him connect with people, and it's a big reason why I invited him on the show today. And I think that he really has a good understanding about what is powerful in that spiritual communication process. So I'm hoping that you can share a bit about that today in our show and get people excited about what they can bring to the table.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, I'm looking forward to
it. Great. So let's get started. What is powerful spiritual communication to you?
I think over the years there's been a lot of emphasis within mediumship on evidence, and quite rightly so. Our first job really as the medium is to provide enough evidence that we know that that person that we're saying we're communicating with in the spirit world is present. But a truly powerful communication isn't all about practical evidence. For me personally, it's about allowing the presence of the spirit world and the communicator to emanate from us. And when you combine that presence with very strong and robust evidence of the communicator. That's what creates the power of the communication. But also, I think it all depends on the style of mediumship that you're trying to develop to. Again, I often go and watch demonstrations of mediumship, and what you find is pieces of information about the communicator that may be impressive, there might be nice information, but it doesn't actually connect together to tell the story of the communicator. And it's a style of mediumship that I've been developing for a long time, but I really consider the communications to be a story, where the medium is reliving certain aspects of the communicator's life, that the aspects that they actually need to share with their loved ones. And our job as the medium, rather than being an observer of the spirit world and wanting to see everything and to have an arm's length relationship, our job is to really relive those experiences with the communicator, and to actually immerse ourselves in that experience with them.
I agree. It's perfectly stated that it's an immersion experience. For me as a medium, I'm strongly clairsentient, so I feel things. I feel what they had physically. I feel the emotions they had, the circumstances that were surrounding their passing, but mainly the dynamic of relationship with the client, and some things that are important to their particular relationship and the growth of that relationship. And then, of course, they sometimes will comment about the people or situations around them too, because some people in spirit are very opinionated. They can't, they want to share. And then others, depending on their personality, are more of the laid back, chill. I don't comment. I keep my opinions to myself. So it depends on the particular personality of the spirit. And I've concentrated over the years on bringing what I call the essence of spirit through, what it feels like to be them. And it is an immersion in that particular story. It's very personal. It's like opening up to the character of a book.
Exactly.
And that's how I have always adjusted over the years too. So we definitely have that in common in our mediumship.
Perfect.
And one of the things that I've also noticed is that by doing that, people really understand that their person is here in the conversation with them during the reading, that they can feel it to such a deep degree that you can feel the joy of the tears that come in during the moments, and that it's a beautiful sustained connection that and confirmation of the love never dies.
Yeah, I think, you see, one of the problems that I think we have within the development of mediumship is the way we actually look at, well, the kind of the traditional teaching of the clairs. You know,
Yes.
what we often do is we've broken down the clairsentience of sensing, the clairvoyance of seeing, the clairaudience of hearing, as though they're actually three separate things. And what that can then mean is that we start to view the experience in a slightly skewed way. I don't actually believe that clairsentience is really about just simply becoming aware of emotion within the communicator. I kind of what I've come to understand is when we talk about the clairsentience, what we're actually talking about is a faculty, a part of the person's soul, which is very much intertwined with their mediumistic potential, that aspect that allows them to move their mind beyond the physical and become aware of the spirit world. And the clairsentience is a faculty of that emotional, of that mediumistic aspect of them. But it's that part of the soul that allows them to blend and become at one with the communicator. And if you look at mediumship, especially every spirit communication that you have, the communications are dependent on your ability to blend and surrender to that communicator. So in that respect, everything within your mediumship is clairsentience. And rather than having these three separate experiences of feeling, seeing, and hearing, I think we have to start to see the mediumship as being a multifaceted experience. through that blending which takes place through the clairsentience, that's what the clairsentience is. It's that ability for you to, as I've said, to blend and become at one with the communicator. The medium is actually having a multifaceted experience, that they're seeing, hearing and feeling all at the same time. And what we can then experience is that at certain times of the communication, one of these facets of the clairsentience. So I don't see clairvoyance and clairaudience on a subjective level, that's when you're experiencing it within the mind, as being separate from the clairsentience. It's just a different aspect of the clairsentience itself. And what we'll begin to experience is what I call the visual facet of the clairsentience, which is where
yes,
we can
you can see by feeling.
Okay, exactly.
Yes.
Sometimes that can become more prominent within the moment, because when the pictures are being triggered, it's because what the spirit communicator is trying to convey to the medium can't purely be communicated through emotion. And we're not, again, and we have to even look at what we mean by emotion, because lots of people think emotion is happiness, sadness, depression. That's part of the emotion. That's where we become aware of the quality of the communicator in terms of the qualities that they exhibit and possess within themselves. But the other aspect of the emotion is about sensing. And we can sense, let's say we have a communicator that was a priest. Rather than having to see a man, it would be a man if it's a Catholic priest, in robes, we can sense that we're a priest. We can sense that we're in a church and conducting a service. And when the pictures are triggered, it's because what's being conveyed can't be conveyed purely through either a sense of doing something or experiencing something, or through the emotion of a quality of the person's soul. And so the pictures, this visual aspect of the clairsentience, is adding a layer of complexity. It allows the medium to become aware of more practical evidence and more complex things. But the problem that we have is, as we've been teaching, okay, look, you're either going to see a picture, you're either going to hear a word, or you're going to feel an emotion. When a prominent part of the experience is triggered, the medium thinks, okay, well, I've got a picture of a beer can. That's what I've become aware of. I've got to focus on this beer can. And what we're missing is that we're actually having a multifaceted experience in the moment. Although the beer can might be the most prominent thing that we're becoming aware of, there's still a sense and even sound that's happening in a much more subtle way, which can present itself quite often as just this inner knowing, this little voice that's telling us what to do. And the medium isn't becoming fully aware of that more subtle experience, and therefore they find it difficult to understand what that beer can means. And so what we have to do within the training, I feel, is we have to place a lot more emphasis on building a very solid emotional foundation through working with exercises to do with personality that can identify the quality of the communicator, but also learning and training ourselves how to sense the practical evidence rather than seeing everything. And it's through that sensing that we can then start to surrender and immerse ourselves in the experience. When I said before about mediums wanting to be observers, what I mean by that is that we wanted to see everything rather than actually become the communicator through the emotion. And when you mentioned talking about the essence of the communicator, I think I have a little bit of a different idea as to what that is, because I think every communication that we work with, we're working within the essence, if we understand what the essence truly is, which is really the core quality of the communicators. What character traits do they possess? And when that's all we're becoming aware of, I believe, actually, within the communication.
Sure.
And when we start to look at these character traits that we all possess, not just in the spirit, but even if you look at our own lives today, when we look at a particular trait that we have, let's say the trait of being generous. That trait has a history. It started somewhere. And most of the time that quality will be present at the very moment of conception. It's that quality that's been given by that greater power that we call the spirit. And that quality, and in the way that it's present within the individual, and of course the balance of the other qualities that are there, the other virtues, if you want to call them that, will to some degree determine the way that a person will navigate and interact with people in the world. But on the other hand, their life experience up until now will also further individualize and change the nature of that quality. So there's this symbiotic relationship. The way that we are naturally predisposed, the way that those qualities have been given to us from that greater power that we call God, or we call the spirit, will determine to a degree our personality. But our life experiences also shape and change that. So when we're becoming aware of a communicator, this is why we become aware of practical evidence, and we become aware of the quality that's there within the individual. It's because as we become aware of that quality, for instance, of generosity, what will then happen is that we start to perceive the life experiences that have shaped that quality. And what you'll find within the communications is that either the life experiences that we're expressing are either an example of how that quality was expressed within their life, or what caused that quality to actually manifest within them. And so this is when we're talking about bringing alive the communicator, by marrying by identifying these core qualities of who they are and marrying them to their life experiences, and that which has a whole history, of course, from the first day they were born to the last day of their life. That's what really brings alive the communication. That's what really allows us to get a sense of who that communicator is. And this is why I said right at the beginning, a powerful communication of mediumship isn't just that your mom lived at 25 Rodeo Drive and she drove a pink Cadillac. It's actually has to be a mixture of the qualities that she possessed, so that we get that sense of her personality and what she was like, and then examples of that have within her life of how that generosity was, in this case, this example, that generosity was expressed. So it may be that we've become aware of the pink Cadillac because that was the car that she bought her daughter for her first car, and that's again an expression of that generosity that she had for them. So I think we've got to, as mediums, start to really change the emphasis of our focus within our development. And of course, if we're wanting to really experience the essence of the communicator in the way that I've said, that's largely dependent on the medium's willingness to explore themselves and to actually allow them to build a very open and honest relationship with themselves. And the reason for that, and I'm taking up a lot of time here talking.
No, it's lovely.
The reason for that is quite often, if we understand the mediumship to come from the emotion, which it does, what we have to then recognize is that at certain points within the communication, the medium will often either have emotions that are triggered that they don't understand what they are. So that this emotion comes and it can be quite overwhelming at times, but the medium doesn't really know what that emotion means. Or they're aware of an emotion and know what it means, but can't find quite the right words to adequately express what they're experiencing. And what big part of my teaching is to actually recognize that the experiences that we're having within the mediumship, although they are the spirit person's experiences, so as your soul is blending with your communicator, you're becoming aware of these different qualities and these different aspects of the life experiences that they've had. But as you're blending with it, the spirit person's soul is actually triggering emotion and experiences that you've gone through yourself within your own life. And that's actually what you're becoming consciously aware of. So, when we say that the spirit person is giving us something, it's not quite true. Because what's actually happening is we're becoming aware of certain aspects of the communicator's life. And as through that blending, as our soul is becoming aware of it, it's triggering emotions and experiences that we've gone through that's there within our own subconscious mind. And through the imagination, we're becoming consciously aware of these different aspects of our own life experience, which correlates to the spirit person's life experiences, which is why it works. But what does that mean? Well, it means that everything that we become aware of in the mediumship is a reflection of our own self and of our own life. So when there's emotions that are triggered within the communication and the medium doesn't understand what those emotions are, it's telling the medium there's certain emotions within them that they don't understand. And likewise, when emotions are triggered but we can't find the right words to express them, it's telling us that there's certain aspects of our own life experience that we recognize has happened, but we've not yet formulated a language, a vocabulary to express them enough. So the only way to really deepen the mediumistic expression is to deepen that understanding of our own soul and our own life experiences, so that when they are triggered within the communication, not only do we recognize what they are because we're spiritually aware of our own self and our own life experience, but through that process of self-development, we've also developed a language and a vocabulary that can accurately communicate them and convey those experiences. And that is the missing ingredient, I think, Willa, that most mediums skip over. We go straight into seminars doing practical exercises, wanting to see everything. And we forget about this spiritual awareness that really underpins everything else. It's the foundation that everything else rests upon. Mm-hmm. And this is why, and if we're very honest, when we often go to see demonstrations of mediumship, they aren't powerful because they're bits of information that don't bring alive that story of the communication. And quite often, the medium hasn't developed their own power through that self understanding of the spiritual awareness to actually enable the power of the communication and the power of the communicator, more importantly, to emanate from them, to create that presence. And so this is where as a teacher, these are the gaps that I like to fill with students. Mm-hmm. And provide a rounded education that can help them to become the rounded medium, and it's not just about practical evidence, it's also or practical exercises, it's also about an understanding of the philosophy and a very deep understanding of themselves.
I do agree that is an essential component to really focus on your own spiritual unfoldment. That was always a focus in the classes that I took growing up in mediumship. And it was always the basis of how I was taught my mediumship as well. And I do feel that it's a beautiful explanation of what it's like to merge with spirit. And it is important that you've had your own life experiences, which I think why a lot of mediums, they don't really start until they're in their 50s or 60s in terms of getting into that understanding of I'm going to apply myself into classes and really fine tune this. They've kind of made it, they've had an arc within their own life and they're at that point. I do feel it's possible for us to receive information. I have to say, it is possible for us to receive information that we don't personally understand or have had any experience with, because I have done that in my own mediumship. And even though I don't understand it, I give the information to the client and they're like, absolutely, that's exactly what happened. And so I think part of that is the reason I'm able to do that is, as you said, imagination. It's about development of that, because intuition will use imagination to convey information, especially in mediumship, I've noticed. that if you're able to take yourself into a place that you're maybe not comfortable with initially, that you're able to really be there for the person in spirit and hold that energy with them to really explore who they are.
Yeah.
And so I hear what you're saying entirely. There's a beauty to doing that.
Yeah, I think when I'm talking about it, that everything you become aware of is part of your own lived experience, I'm not just talking about what you've personally experienced firsthand in life. I'm talking about what you've read about, what you've seen on TV, what you've witnessed, the stories that you've heard from people, books
Yes.
that you've read. Every experience that you've had in not just lived experiences that you've had firsthand, but everything you've been exposed to in your life, i.e., whatever's there within the subconscious mind, can be used by the spirit world.
It is an amalgamation, and to some extent, as a sensitive, we are being played like a harp. And there are different notes of vibration that are being enhanced during certain communications.
Yeah, and
Different strings.
Yeah, the thing I think we've got to kind of look at is it. Lots of people think that what they're becoming aware of in the communication, this is the main point really, is that they're actually becoming aware of what it is that the spirit person actually experienced themselves. So the actual spirit person's experience. But if that was the case, then what we've got to question is okay, let's say you've got a dad in the spirit world who comes, and what's triggered within your experience is a green Jaguar car. Okay, so you say, okay, your dad had a Jaguar car, and you say, the person says yes, and then you say, well, it was a green car, and they go no. Right? How many times has that happened? It happens all the time. Now, if that green car that you're becoming aware of was the actual experience that you're becoming aware, the actual experience of that gentleman's car, then one of two things is something's not quite right there. Either the spirit person has forgotten what color car he had because he's giving you a green car and it was a red car, or we've created or colored the experience in some way. And in my experience, what we're actually becoming aware of is, and this is exactly it. You may have, for instance, have blended with that communicator, become aware of that experience of owning a Jaguar car, and that's then triggered a picture of an image of a Jaguar car that you've seen somewhere in your life or on TV and owned it, whatever, and that's been triggered, and that's there to give you that sense of owning Jaguar cars. And the fact that it's green can be not because they actually owned a green car, but if we understand color, it may be the color of green can be of being of service. For instance, it often associates as a general meaning of being part of the medical profession. It may be that you've got a dad who used to own a Jaguar car and he was a doctor, and that evidence, that experience is all tied up and communicated through that simple experience that you're having. Now, that what I think is, and this is where what I'm saying this is that when people think, okay, what I'm actually becoming aware of is the exact experience that the spirit person had, what the medium then has a tendency of doing, in my experience, is just describing what it is that, in this case, that they're seeing, which is why we get to dad who had a green Jaguar car, and it's not quite right. When we start to understand that what is being triggered through the imagination is the most efficient and easiest way that what you're actually becoming aware of, that part of the life story of that communicator that you're becoming aware of, can be expressed, it allows us to actually be much more creative within the mediumistic expression. And that's what actually leads us through that creativity of our mind to unfold different aspects of the story. What you might be becoming aware of is dad jumping into his Jaguar car and rushing off to the hospital to save a life of a child because that was his job. And the reason that you've got the green car is because, well, we know that's part of the story, that dad had a Jaguar car. And then as we understand that green, it moves us into his work in the medical field. And then there's this memory there of dad being on call and jumping into his car and going to save a kid's life, and then may have even died in a car accident on the way there. All of that story is represented within that simple experience, and it's through the sensing that we can then connect these dots and bring alive this fuller story.
It is the development of symbols. The language of spirit in many ways is symbols. And you're trying to move from just playing charades, or sounds like, with spirit into that understanding of your symbols. And as you said, that filter that we all have through which we see things and feel things and perceive and sense our world and spirit world. So it absolutely is about knowing your symbols and how they apply in the space of the session with the client. And I do feel that there's usually a corresponding feeling that happens when you have a symbol that's being used. Let's say the green of the car. There's usually, it's all about how you feel about that in the particular moment. That also can be such an indicator of the experience that the spirit communicator is trying to share with you.
Yeah, I think when we're talking about symbology, and again, I say this just to help your listeners who are developing their own mediumship. If you remember earlier on, I said, look, when a picture is triggered, it's because what could be communicated or what the spirit person is trying to convey can't be adequately expressed purely through a sense of something or an emotion. So when we talk about symbology, quite often what I see within students is students using that picture of the car to say, rather than saying, okay, your dad owned a Jaguar car, you've still got that car in your garage and he was a doctor and blah, blah, blah. They go on to, your dad liked speed, he liked the sense of freedom. And if you think about it, that if that's what the communicator is trying to convey, a sense of freedom and a sense of speed, these things can be adequately and you'll experience it all the time, they can be adequately experienced through the emotion of sensing that, or of actually that quality of freedom, for instance. So when these pictures are triggered, particularly pictures, these visual experiences, in my experience, that they're always trying to convey very practical, specific evidence that goes beyond the personality or a sense of speed, for instance, in this case. And this is something that I think we've got to, what I often, this is what's important, what can often happen is that when we don't quite understand the importance of these visual experiences and how to work with them properly, we often throw away very good evidence that really brings alive that story, because we miss all the practical stuff, and then we just go back into, okay, this is the symbolically, it means a car always means to me someone that likes speed. And this is where we've got to use our imagination in a more creative way to really understand, in this particular context of this particular communicator, why is this experience, if it's a picture, been triggered, to what practical evidence are they trying to get across to me?
And we do also have to be careful as mediums when we do see, let's say, that green car. It might not be what we would have as our lexicon of symbols and feelings associated with that. It may be something that the client, the sitter, really understands, that has nothing to do with what our preconceived notions would be.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, since the first day that I developed mediumship, I was fortunate to have a teacher that gave me a very good foundation of understanding. I've never had a lexicon of, okay, this, if I get a rose, it means this, because a rose could mean 100,000 different things.
Right.
And this is exactly the why I talked earlier on about the clairsentience, is that rather than having a picture and saying, okay, well, this picture normally means this, because in our minds, the way that we understand that rose could mean 100,000 things. Like I've said, it could be the person's name was Rose. It could be that they lived on Rose Lane. It could be they used to grow roses. It could be that you placed a rose on the inside the coffin with them. You've got a press rose of the person. It could mean 100,000 different things. The way that we know how we understand for this communicator, what does this rose mean? It's about opening your mind up, not just to the rose, but to the multifaceted experience that you're having. Within that moment of having that experience, you're going to know, through that sensing, you're going to know how to use the rose in the right way for this communicator. There's actually no need to have a database in your mind of 1,000 different symbols and 1,000 what these symbols mean in 1,000 different ways. You've just got to relive the moment. That's simple. And if you think about it, it's quite limiting, isn't it? If you've got if a rose means 7 things to you, and that's whenever you get a rose, it means one of those 7 things. All of a sudden, you've now just reduced 100,000 possibilities to 7, and that limits actually your ability to communicate more unusual and more complex things of the spirit person. And this is what I'm passionate about, trying to help students to readjust that thinking, to open their mind up, and rather than having these, as you said, these preconceived ideas of what these things mean, just to have an experience. And when you allow yourself to have that experience, you know, and again, and I think everyone can agree on this. When the mediumship, if you take your mind back to when your mediumship has really worked well. Sorry, Willa, give me one moment. Excuse me. So when you take your mind back to when your mediumship has worked really well, there is no understanding. It's just there. You haven't got to think about things. You haven't got to try and work things out. When you truly surrender to that power, it just comes out of your mouth.
Yeah, it just flows right out.
Right.
And there's a beauty.
Exactly, because in that moment, you've surrendered. You've given yourself freely. And when we talk about surrender, what we're actually talking about is, this is my opinion, of course, is that if you think about, if you imagine that for a moment that you're in the spirit world, and I was your medium, and let's say one of your children was the recipient, I'm sure that if you was in the spirit world now, and one of your children was the recipient, there'd be certain things that you would need to get across to them, certain things that you would need to say. And our job as the medium is to allow that communicator to actually express what they need. Now, if you imagine you're in the spirit world and imagine that sitting's taking place and you've got 20 minutes to get across that need, would you express that most important thing that you've got to say at the beginning of a contact, of that communication, or would you wait right till the end? Like, I think if you've got 30 minutes, it might be the only chance you ever get to communicate with your loved ones while they're still here on Earth. It'd be the first thing you would say would be the most important thing. And what that tells us as the medium is 2 things. The first thing is that every communication that we have, there is a need there, and a need of certain things that the spirit person has to get off their chest. And that may be completely different to what we want to hear as the recipient. We have to stop worrying about what the recipient wants to hear. That's right. And focus on what the spirit person needs to express.
Because we have to honor what the person in spirit is wanting to convey. And first, it's almost like constructing a good news article. You have to be able to have a good sense of that person in spirit, establish who your communicator is, the source, right? The source, and then convey that message to the sitter.
So that's the first thing. The second thing is, of course, that what he's telling us is actually the very first impression that we have is the most important, because that's the need. That's what the person's actually, that's the subject of their life, the aspect of their life that they actually want to express. So let's say, for instance, that you've got a grandfather that comes, and what he needs to get across to his grandson was his work of being a carpenter, right? Now, that we won't know why that aspect needs to be expressed until the end of the contact. But what we've got to then do, and this is the style that I really try to help develop within students and within my own mediumship, I've spent a lot of time on doing this, is that rather than just saying your grandfather's a carpenter, and then moving on to something else. This is why we get these bits of information. So I've got your granddad that's a carpenter, that's the need. But now all of a sudden, now we've said that, so now we're going to move on to your grandfather had a heart attack. Your granddad liked to collect stamps. Your granddad used to go fishing. Rather than having these disjointed statements of evidence, why not just allow the communicator to relive that moment, that story about their work as the carpenter? Now, if that's the need, because it's the very first thing that has been expressed, and that's the most important thing, if we stay with that subject and allow the spirit person then to lead the way, so that they're leading it by that very first experience is their need. If we let them then lead the conversation and move us to experience that part of their life and bring it alive, tell the story of what their carpentry, all we have to then do as the medium is just to follow them on that journey. What we often see, I think, within mediumship is, and again, it's not the fault of the medium most of the time, it's actually the way that they've been trained, is that rather than just focusing on that very first impression, which is the need, and following it, we control the narrative. We're looking for bits of information. We're looking for things because we're taught, well, actually, in a contact, good information is a job. It's how they've passed. It's what they look like. It's their personality. Well, what if the communicator doesn't want to tell you what they look like?
So I find this a very interesting difference between, let's say, American mediumship and British mediumship. So in American mediumship, typically you're only allowed to do a message for 2 to 3 minutes. You have a time limit because you're having to make sure you give as much in terms of messages, number of messages, and you're trying to encapsulate a quality message within that little bit of time. Now, in British mediumship, because people I don't think understand quite the difference on this, in British mediumship, there is a more lengthy time given for messages, for spirit messages. So I believe the time that I saw you work, you gave 3 messages during that whole time, and they were lengthy messages, and they were exploratory messages in that sense of going into memories that they had and going into those experiences. So you're right, there is a training difference that happens on the different sides of the pond, as it were. But I noticed with yours, it's a bit different because sometimes with the British style mediumship, you don't know who you're going to, you're giving out information and seeing who can take that from the people who are gathered there in a public demonstration mediumship situation. Whereas you did go direct and you went very intense and very fully with each message. But over the course of a half hour, you're allowing for about 9-10 minutes for each message. And I wish we had that kind of ability to do it that way. In our construct, you're right, it's more of that, you've got 2 to 3 minutes to get your message across before another person who is in need needs to have that message. So there is a difference.
Yeah, the thing, this is the, and there's actually a reason for that, why that style that I demonstrate is because what we've got to remember within the first thing that we've got to remember is that I'm saying to someone who we've got to see it in the bigger picture, not just preaching to people that are spiritualists or that are already convinced of that reality. There may be people in that room that are not convinced of that reality. So I'm saying to that person, like, I've got your mom here from the spirit world. It's not if I don't provide evidence that it is their mom, and again, that evidence has to be strong enough that only one person in the room can understand it. Now, if I said to you, okay,
Yes.
I've got your mom here, and there's an audience of 100 people, there's 80 people that have a mom, and that's the only evidence that I've given, just the relationship in that, and then move on to a message. Well, that mom could relate to any one of those 80 people. So the first stage is to really to make sure that only one person in the room can understand the evidence that I'm giving, because then we know, well, it is your mom.
So that's why I liked it in terms of the British style, having watched that, where, they're having to hone it down. And first there are 5 people, and then they're trying to get it down to 1. And it was such a refreshing thing to watch you go direct, because that's how I work. I go direct, and I develop within that message what spirit's wanting to convey. It has to be nuggets, because that's all you have time to do. But I liked your approach of being able to explore it more.
Yeah.
And you were saying you have this, and you described what it looked like, and it was nice.
To do the other things. So the first thing you've got is we've got to get down to one person. Secondly, that evidence has got to have enough of an impact. That's what my job is to I think my job as the medium is to, yes, communicate the need of the recipient, but also to leave an impact with those people in that room, that for those moments, that reality of the spirit world is real. Okay. And the way to do that is, as I said, to allow that power to emanate from you. And that takes time to build, and it builds through the story that you're giving. The second thing that I've come to understand is that when we're talking about the message, we want to make sure that the message is actually coming from the spirit world. And of course, there is a possibility, and we have to be very open about that if I say, okay, I've got your mom here from the spirit world, the person says, yes, well, your mom's telling me that you've just had your teeth mended, and you're going through a difficult time with your work, and all this stuff's going on that you're upset about. I can tell you all that stuff on the psychic level. Has that information actually come from the spirit world? Well, the first thing is, if I give you enough evidence that your mom is there, that already lends credibility to the message that I'm going to give.
Yes.
But
Yes.
but secondly, the message, it is actually embedded within the evidence. If your dad comes, for instance, and talks about his work as a business person, that's the mainstay of the communication, that story about his work as a businessman and what's going on. Usually it's because the message is going to be about the recipient's work. That's the intelligence of the spirit world. They will bring aspects of their life that once we've understood that it's come from the spirit world as evidence of the communicator, we can then use that evidence. We can allow our mind to go back at the end of the contact. We can allow our mind to go back through all the evidence that we've said, the experiences that we've had with the spirit world. We'll find that 1 or 2 things will stand out to us that we can then use symbolically through that clairsentience of blending with the communicator to convey the message of the communicator themselves.
I agree. And I think it's because the person in spirit in some ways is an expert about what they've experienced.
What they've experienced.
And they will use that expertise, if you will, if they're very good at work or business, or their particular ethics about those things, it will then convey in a message of advice, possibly.
Well, think about this. Let's say, for instance, you've got a recipient in the room that's going through stage 4 cancer. They really want to hear from their dad, but their dad never had cancer. He was a successful businessman, passed with a heart attack. But their mom, who they didn't get on very well with, had stage 4 cancer before she passed. Who do you think is going to come from the spirit world to actually help them with that cancer? The dad or the mom? Well, I'm sure it'd more likely be mom. She's had the experience. She knows what you're going through. And this is where you've got to remember that sometimes people want to hear from certain people in the spirit world, but the people that will actually communicate are the ones that can best help you with what's going on within your own.
And isn't that interesting? Because it's possible that they would want to reject that person that is giving them the most support at that particular moment because of a past hurt or past wounding that's gone on with that person. But typically a person in spirit that has had that kind of arrangement of relationship will do their best to heal that in order to then further heal that person in their life in today.
I don't want listeners to think that, I'm not saying that the style of mediumship that I've developed is in some way superior or better. It's just a different style.
Yes, yes.
I think for me, the way that I'm working with the spirit world is that I know that the richer the story that I can express about the spirit communicator's life, the richer the message will be, because I'm using elements of that evidence as the message. So if I miss things and I don't allow it to unfold, then that's the case. The second thing is that I probably view the demonstrations in a slightly different way. in the sense that, yeah, you're right. My contacts are usually on the 10-minute mark. So that's the time that I work to, and that gives me enough time. In my training, I was always trained for 7 minutes, but those extra 3 minutes that I'm trying to develop gives me the flexibility to be able to do justice to that communication that
Yes.
I feel like needs to be done. But we've got to remember that within the demonstration of mediumship, it's not actually about. It's like a shop window, it's supposed to show you the potential of what communication can be, and it's supposed to, I believe, be there to plant a seed within the recipient's minds that, look, and this is the bigger picture, is that if you provide someone with evidence that their loved one has survived physical death, the question that the individual should then be asking is, well, if my loved one has survived physical death and have this thing called the soul, then I must have a soul as well.
Yes. Yes, I have said that so many times. Some of my favorite readings have been because a person realizes, because we're able to communicate with these souls who have passed, I have a soul, and it's made their life transcendent.
Exactly. It takes them on their own personal journey. And
Yes.
of course, they might then go for private sittings. They might look at their own meditation practice, their own spiritual involvement. They'll find a meaning and richness to their own life through those practices. But again, in order to create that seed of change, you have to have these powerful communications, which is the subject of this talk. And again, if I can bring alive your loved one and not talk about their whole life, it's impossible in 10 minutes, but to focus on the one aspect of their life that they really need to express, and rather than just giving it a cursory, your grandfather was a carpenter, let's move on, but actually then to allow myself to relive that memory. And that might simply be, well, your grandfather was a carpenter, yep. At his home, there used to be a little workshop that you used to go and look at work with your grandfather. Yep, you used to make furniture together. You did this, you did that, and I tell that part of their life story. And again, this is the thing you've got to remember, listeners, is that if you really trust that very first impression, the need that's there, it will always lead to these wonderful stories, because it's going to be something poignant that is a shared moment, something important that connects these two people together, and something that identifies the communicator. You think about it. If I was in the spirit, I had 100 people in the room, and my mom was there, the first thing that I would want to do is for my mom to know it's me, it's Andy. So the thing that I'm going to need to express is going to be something that identifies me. Think about it. If you've got 100 people in the room and they all know 10 people in the spirit world, then for every 100 people, there could be anywhere between 1,000 and 3,000 people, even more, who could come from the spirit world, right? So the first thing that I'd want to do as my mom's son is to say, look, it's me, and this is a part of my life that's important to us both, but it's also a part of my life that differentiates me from another 2,999 people in the spirit world that could come to this demonstration. So that very first impression is going to give you a very strong experience that can identify who the communicator is, and it's going to naturally lead you into a very enriching, meaningful, poignant story. And by unfolding that story, that part of the spirit person's life in a more fuller way, you then allow the presence of the spirit person to come, because you're now getting to understand that part of them properly, rather than just touching the surface of every different little bits of aspects of their life. And for me, that's what creates the powerful communication. And when you touch people, this is the thing that I think is really important. When you've got, I think sometimes we what we worry about is, okay, like I want these very short communications. I want to get through as many people as I possibly can. Okay, but I also don't want to bore people. I want to engage my audience. That's another reason why lots of people try to do these very short contacts. In my experience, I hope no one's ever charged me with being bored at a demonstration. I think 10 minutes It's long enough that people don't switch off, but it gives you enough time to, people will be enthralled and engaged in the stories that you're unfolding because they feel like they got to know that person too. And that's the power of the mediumship. If you really tell the story and allow that presence to emanate from you, because you've now surrendered, you've let the spirit, you're letting the spirit person really express what they need to express, and you're just following them and becoming a part of them as that communication happens. The person who the contact is for will feel the presence of their loved one, and that will have much more of an impact and plant that seed than anything else. But the whole audience will be touched by that power too.
So it does involve training the audience or the participants to be rooting for the person who's receiving the message.
I think most of the time they are.
For that spirit communication that is there. And I think there in some ways needs to be a re-education of that understanding within people so that they cannot just be like, me, I want my message, but I'm glad to see that this is unfolding for another person.
Yeah,
and that's what people say when they've watched me do a mediumship. I've had people say, I really enjoyed watching you. And I felt so happy for them.
Exactly.
I had that contact. So I hear what you're saying. That is such an essential part of this.
I think most people, when they come to go to demonstrations, of course, everyone is hoping to receive a communication from their loved one. But the vast majority of people are, if it's good mediumship, they're engaged with that story that you're unfolding. You know, if you think, put this another way, for the recipient, what I'm hoping to do with mediumship is to allow them to relive, as I'm retelling this story about their loved one. I'm hoping that they will relive that in their own imagination and relive it with me. So they are then allowing that emotion to come to the surface within them. They're moved by it. But I'm also hoping that the rest of the audience are imagining what this person was like. Yeah. And what you'll find is that a good demonstration of mediumship will leave the whole audience feeling as though they've just met 10 different individuals for the first time. Yeah. And that's what engages people. And that's what actually I think, where as the medium, we can have an impact on the whole audience, because all of a sudden, not only have we had good evidence, but there's this sort of qualitative experience of being touched by the presence of the spirit. And it's just by allowing that person to be touched by it. And that can sometimes make when they are, it can make the person feel that they've been introduced to the spirit people for the first time, who've communicated that evening. 90 seconds. That has the impact, you know, and that's it. I think that's what we're all hoping for. Achieving it is a different thing, but that's what we're all aiming for, I think.
So it's interesting. I've been watching the feed, and people have such great positive comments that they're sharing. Someone had an interesting question. What about having communication with someone that you don't know? Has that ever happened to you when you're doing message work, that the person has not known that person in their lifetime?
Yeah, I mean, I've given it contacts from people. Let's say I said, okay, I've got your great grandfather here from the spirit. Well, I've never met him, didn't know him. But what you'll find is that when that happens, the person may not have had first-hand experience, but they will still know through stories of the family stories or things they've heard about in the family. They'll still usually know information pertaining to them that they can corroborate in the moment. Or what sometimes will happen is, and this is the thing you have to, this is why we have to always remember we're working with an intelligence in the spirit world. Let's say you didn't know your great grandfather, but he wants to is more than entitled to say hello to you and introduce himself. What you'll often find is there'll be another communicator that's present as well. It may be that your mum comes, we should know all the evidence about your mum. So we tell that story about your mum, and then we say, well, your great grandfather, your mum's grandfather, is also in the spirit world, and you say, you know, his name was Robert, and he was a carpenter, let's say, right? And they say, well, I'm not sure about that. I say, well, your mum's here, you've understood all of that. There's still people that you can ask in the family. Go away and ask. And quite often, the best evidence that you can give someone is evidence that they don't know, but
Yes.
afterwards they go away and check and it's right. But what we've got to be careful of is that we don't spend 10 minutes telling this big story about great grandfather who the person had no knowledge of, because it doesn't achieve anything. And that isn't the intelligence of the spirit world wouldn't allow for that to happen.
So there is a balancing act between what spirit wants and what the client, the sitter, the message receiver wants. There's a difference of sometimes.
Sometimes,
in that.
And
Yeah.
I think as the medium, we've got to be, and this might sound a bit callous, but in the demonstrations, and even when I'm working in private sittings, when I'm working mediumistically, I'm not there in that moment for the recipient. I'm there for the communicator. And when I'm working psychically in the private sitting, we shouldn't be using the psychic level on the demonstrations. The reason being is that the demonstration is there to provide evidence of life after life, and the psychic level doesn't provide that. But in the private sitting, we can, and that's the right place to use it. When I'm working psychically, I'm there to serve the need of the recipient. When I'm working mediumistically, I'm there to serve the need of the spirit person, and I hope that marries together, but it doesn't always. And the other thing, I'll just say this as a parting comment, even when people come for private sittings and they need help with their own life and what's going on, quite often what they want you to talk about and what they need can be two different things too.
That is true. That is true.
You might have somebody that wants you to talk about their new job, but what we've got to talk about is actually their home life, because they want a new job, but they've just had twins, and until we've got to get that balance between the children and the work. So they want you to tell them they're having this wonderful job. But what they need is help with organising their family life that will allow that potential for the work to happen, and that can sometimes cause conflict too. Again, we shouldn't be in the "I want to make people happy" game. We should be there to serve the need of that soul. Yes. And we've all been kids, and our parents have had good parents. They've often not given us what we've wanted, but they've always given us what we've needed. And as the medium, we have to have that same mentality. We're there not to make them happy in the moment and give them what they want. We've got to give them what they need, because in the long run, that's what's going to have an impact and change their life in some way.
So any last tips for people? I know time's gone by so fast, and it's been wonderful to have this conversation with you. You've shared some really wonderful points so far. So is there any last tips you'd like to share with people?
I think in terms of the style of mediumship, that if you're looking to develop mediumship, always look at this is what I've always done for myself. As I've always said, if I could have a contact from, me and my grandfather were very close. If I could have a contact from my grandfather, what type of contact would make a difference to me? What types of things would be said? The style of that delivery. What would it be that I would need for myself? And I've tried to give that to everybody else that I've worked with. That's the first thing, is look at, don't worry about the results. Especially as students often worry about being right or wrong, and that's their focus. I want to be all right. I want everything to be right. Focus on what it is you're learning, and never compromise the short-term rewards for long-term. So, sometimes what I mean by that is within our exercises, we'll play safe because we want to be right all the time. And we get this short-term reward, but in the long term, that has no benefit for our mediumship, because we're not stretching the boundaries. We're not allowing ourselves to explore and to be fearless and try new things and experiment within our exercises. And what you'll find within mediumship development is a struggle. Every day is a struggle. And we always want to avoid the struggle. And it's through the struggle, through getting things wrong and experimenting, that our mediumship can blossom and unfold in the long term. Yeah. So never sacrifice that long-term unfoldment for short-term satisfaction. And thirdly, I think most people that I've taught over the years, not vast majority of them, spend 80% of their time, 90% of their time on practical exercises, practical training, and 10% on their own self-development. And when lots of students get a bit of a rude awakening when they train with me, because you've got to put the opposite. It's got to be 90% of your time, especially in the early days of your development, on the self and actually becoming comfortable within your own skin and understanding and building this honest relationship with yourself. Spend all of your time doing that. Sit regularly sitting in the power, in that practice of sitting in the power. If you can do that an hour a day, that would be fantastic. And focus on that. That will lead you on this personal spiritual journey of understanding the self. And then place 10% of your time on practical exercises. In the long run, it's that self-development that is the missing ingredient for achieving the mediumship. And lots of people out there that come to me for help, they're at a kind of a glass ceiling. That they can see what their mediumship could be, and they know there's something more to come, but they can't quite move in that they can't quite unfold their mediumship to that degree. It's this glass ceiling. And what's causing that glass ceiling is sometimes bad habits that we've picked up in our training, and more often than not, because we haven't unfolded our own soul to the point that we can then have these more subtle and more refined communications, which will ultimately lead to better communications with the spirit world. So take care of yourselves, be honest with yourselves, and focus on understanding who you are. And if you do that, the mediumship will take care of itself.
That is very true. And I love what Harry Edwards, a famous spiritualist, medium, and healer, he said that for a professional medium, it's really important for them to be of even mind. And that if you can't be of even mind, you shouldn't do the work. And part of being of even mind is to have done the spiritual unfoldment work within yourself, so that you can be a true reflection of what spirit needs you to be in that moment, to be that divine channel for information and sensations and experience from spirit.
Yeah, it's about really recognizing your strengths and your weaknesses, but being satisfied with both.
True.
You know, this is the thing. We always want to eradicate our weak points, but actually to have a really honest and open relationship with ourselves, and to be comfortable in our own skin, to find that balance. It's about saying, yeah, these are my strengths, these are my weaknesses, and I'm happy with both. I'm going to work on these weaknesses and modify them, bring them into that moderate range, but not trying to eradicate them, because they are you, they're part of you, and I think we can never eradicate parts of our nature, but what we can do is soften them, soften certain aspects and strengthen other aspects, to find that middle ground, to find that balance, what Aristotle would call the golden mean. And that's really what Harry Edwards is talking about too. It's that balance of when we balance those qualities within, we find the virtue. We come to that point of virtuousness. So good. I hope that helps.
Excellent. Oh, it's been wonderful, Andy. I really appreciate you sharing with us today. I knew it would be a wonderful sharing that you would have to give, and insightful words, and your own experience as a medium really shines through. I appreciate it so much. So I encourage people to check out andybyng.com. That's Andy's website if they would like to learn more about Andy and his particular style of mediumship and understandings about mediumship. It's really lovely. And I encourage you to tune in for next week on Wednesdays with Willa. My guest will be Tom Kratzley. We'll be talking about healing with the voice. And it's such an important topic in today's time. And Tom Kratzley is a wonderful spiritual healer, and we'll bring those kinds of insights to our podcast next week. I also encourage you to check out willawhite.com. I do have online classes that I'm offering, and I do have one for February, and I have some wonderful mediumship classes that I'm lining up for March. So I encourage you to subscribe to my email newsletter. You can find that also on my website, willawhite.com. Thank you so much for being here today, Andy. I really appreciate everything you shared. I know people are writing in such great comments, and I can't wait to experience more, and hope you can be on the show again. Thanks so much. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.